The Rancher and the Healer. Before we start, just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get to the video. The Weight of Solitude. The Arizona sun, a relentless hammer of heat, beat down on Silas Blackwood's ranch, turning the already parched earth into a cracked canvas of rust and ochre. For 40 years, Silas had been like the land around him, rugged, unyielding, and profoundly solitary. His hands, calloused and strong from a lifetime of working cattle and mending fences, were a testament to his existence. His face, etched with lines that spoke of squinting against the sun and battling the wind, was a map of a life lived largely in isolation. Blackwood Ranch wasn't much to look at anymore. The main house, a sturdy but weathered two-story structure, stood like a sentinel against the vast, empty sky. The barns leaned, the corrals needed constant repair, and the fence line stretched for miles, a never-ending testament to a rancher's work. Silas had inherited it from his father, who had inherited it from his, a lineage of men who clung to this harsh land with an almost religious devotion. But unlike his father and grandfather, Silas had done it alone. He was a man of routines. Up before dawn, coffee black as the desert night. Then out to check the herd, fix what was broken, and fight the constant encroaching wilderness. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the stars ignite the ink-black sky. The only sounds the distant cry of a coyote or the soft rustle of wind through the dry grass. He rarely went to town, and when he did, it was for supplies, not company. His interactions were brief, transactional. The few times he'd tried to court a woman in his younger days, the awkwardness had been palpable, the conversation stilted, and the eventual rejection a confirmation of what he already suspected. He wasn't cut out for it. It was meant for the land, for the quiet solitude of working animals and watching sunsets. Or so he told himself. Deep down, beneath the layers of weathered skin and stoic silence, was a profound loneliness. It was a dulak, a constant companion that settled in his chest during the long silent nights. He'd seen other men, younger men, bring wives to their ranches, heard the sounds of children's laughter echoing across the plain. He'd always felt a pang, a fleeting wistfulness, before burying himself deeper in his work. He was 40, an age when many men had families, legacies. Silas had nothing but the land, and the growing realization that it wasn't enough. The silence of his home was vast, almost suffocating. Meals eaten alone, thoughts unspoken, dreams unsaid. He often wondered if he would simply work himself into the ground, and one day the ranch would stand empty, an echo of a solitary life. It was late spring when the unexpected happened. A storm, fierce and sudden, swept across the desert, bringing with it a torrent of rain and a flash flood that roared through a low-lying canyon near his property. Silas had been out mending a fence when he saw the rising water. It helped rescue a few stray cattle, but the true impact of the storm became clear the next morning. A section of the main road, the only access to the outside world for miles, had been washed out. A few days later, a dust-covered wagon, pulled by a single weary horse, appeared on the horizon, slowly making its way along the barely passable detour that skirted the washed-out road. It was an old, well-traveled wagon, adorned with colorful, hand-painted designs that seemed out of place in the monochromatic landscape. It stopped at the edge of his property, where the detour ended abruptly at a deeper, impassable wash. Silas, alerted by the braying of his mule, rode out. From the wagon stepped a woman. She wasn't young, perhaps in her mid-30s, but her presence was striking. Her hair, the color of rich earth, was braided with feathers and beads, and her clothes, though practical, were also woven with intricate patterns. Her eyes, the color of moss after a spring rain, held the depth and warmth that Silas hadn't encountered in years. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice a melodic counterpoint to the desert's harshness. My apologies for trespassing. The road ahead is impassable, and I seem to be stranded. Silas dismounted, his posture stiff, accustomed to addressing men, not women who looked like they'd stepped out of a dream. It's washed out, won't be fixed for a week or two, maybe more. So I surmised, she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. My name is Elara. I travel as a healer, a purveyor of remedies and stories. Silas grunted, a sound that usually conveyed his discomfort with strangers. Healers and traveling folk were rare out here, often regarded with suspicion. Silas Blackwood. This is my ranch. Elara's gaze swept over the vast empty expanse, then settled back on him. It's a magnificent solitude you have here, Mr. Blackwood. He didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever called his loneliness magnificent. I understand if you'd rather I move on, she continued, misinterpreting his silence. Perhaps I can make camp by the old creek bed until the road is clear. No, Silas found himself saying, the word escaping him before he could truly consider it. The thought of her camping alone, vulnerably, didn't sit right with him. You can set up by the house. There's a well. Barn's got room for your horse. Elara's smile widened, genuine and disarming. That's very kind of you, Mr. Blackwood. I'll make sure to earn my keep. As he watched her unhitch her horse with surprising strength and efficiency, Silas felt an unfamiliar flicker in his chest. It wasn't just the presence of another human being, it was the warmth she exuded, a quiet energy that seemed to push back against the vast emptiness of his world. He didn't know what a traveling healer did, or how she would earn her keep, but as he led her wagon towards his isolated ranch house, he knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that his magnificent solitude was about to be profoundly disturbed. Elara set him to Blackwood's ranch, with the quiet grace of a desert creature, adapting to a new watering hole. She didn't intrude, didn't demand, yet her presence began to subtly reshape Silas's rigid world. She set up a small, colorful tent near the well, transforming the arid space with hanging herbs and polished stones. Her horse, a placid mare named Willow, grazed contentedly in the small paddock. Silas, usually wary and remote, found himself drawn to her. He'd catch himself watching her from a distance, tending her smaller garden. She'd started near the well, sketching in a worn leather-bound book, or simply sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with a quiet reverence that mirrored his own. She began to help around the ranch, unasked. She possessed an uncanny knack with animals, calming a skittish mare with a soft touch, nursing a sickly calf back to health with herbal poultices and gentle words. She cooked too, and soon the ranch house, which had long smelled only of dust and old wood, began to fill with the savory aromas of stews and freshly baked bread. Meals, once solitary and hurried, became slow, almost companionable affairs, even if the conversation remained sparse. Elara never pressed him. She respected his silences, filling them with her own quiet work or gentle hums. But sometimes she would simply meet his gaze, and in her moss green eyes he saw not pity or judgment, but an ancient understanding, a calm acceptance. It was a look that stripped away his defenses, leaving him feeling raw and exposed. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, Silas found himself sitting on the porch as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. Elara joined him, a steaming mug of her special herbal tea in her hands. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't empty, but comfortable, filled with the hum of crickets and the vastness of the darkening sky. You carry a heavy load, Silas, she said softly, not looking at him, but at the distant mountains. He grunted, unsure how to respond. He'd never thought of his life as a load, just his life. The land gives, and it takes, she continued, as if reading his thoughts. But sometimes it takes too much, and the heart forgets how to bloom. Silas shifted uncomfortably. My heart's always been good for working, Elara. Not much else. She finally turned to him, her gaze gently. A heart is more than a muscle, Silas. It's where your spirit dwells, and every spirit needs warmth, connection. Like the earth needs rain after a long drought. He felt a blast creep up his neck, a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was a clumsy teenager. Her words, so direct yet so tender, chipped away at the carefully constructed walls around his emotions. The thought of Sarah, his short-lived attempts at courting, the rejections that had reinforced his belief that he was unlovable, unworthy. The ranch had become his shield, his sanctuary. I'm not built for that, Elara, he mumbled, looking down at his worn boots. Never was, always been better with animals than with people. Especially women. A soft, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. We all learn what we're taught, Silas, and sometimes what we're taught is incomplete, or even wrong. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes holding his, but her heart. It remembers its true nature, if only given the chance. Over the next few days, her words lingered in his mind like the scent of sage after a rain. He found himself paying closer attention to her, not just how she moved or worked, but the subtle expressions on her face, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, a sound as rare and precious as desert rain. He realized how much he anticipated her presence, the simple comfort of knowing she was there. One afternoon, a young, nervous cow became entangled in some barbed wire, tearing its hide badly. Silas worked quickly, his hands gentle but firm as he tried to free the terrified animal. Elara arrived, her voice calm and soothing. She talked to the cow, stroking its head, murmuring ancient-sounding words. Miraculously, the animal quieted. While Silas carefully cut the wire, Elara prepared a poultice of herbs and applied it to the wound, her touch feather-light. As they finished, she looked up at Silas, her face close to his. "You have kind hands, Silas Blackwood," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Strong and kind, her words and the closeness of her presence sent a jolt through him, a feeling so potent it almost buckled his knees. He hadn't been touched, truly touched, in years, not in a way that acknowledged him as a man, as a human being with a beating heart. He saw the genuine admiration in her eyes, and a wave of longing, profound and aching, washed over him. It was a longing for connection, for touch, for a warmth that had been absent from his life for so long he'd forgotten it existed. That night, as he lay in his bed, the familiar loneliness was still there, but it was accompanied by a new, more insistent touch. It wasn't just the absence of another. It was the potent presence of Elara, the quiet power of her acceptance, the tantalizing hint of what his life could be. Silas Blackwood, the 40-year-old rancher who had sworn off love and connection, felt the stirrings of something uncharted, something terrifyingly beautiful, pulling him towards a future he'd never dared to dream of. The road might be washed out, but a new path, far more daunting, was opening right in his own heart. The days that followed were charged with an unspoken tension, a silent communication that vibrated between Silas and Elara, like heat haze rising from the desert floor. Silas found himself seeking her out, not just for practical reasons, but for the sheer comfort of her presence. He'd find excuses to linger by her tent, to help her with tasks that didn't strictly require his assistance. He'd catch her watching him, a soft, almost a tender expression in her eyes, and his heart would pound in a way it hadn't since his adolescence. He was acutely aware of his inexperience. 40-year-old and a virgin. The weight of that fact was a heavy cloak, a source of profound embarrassment and anxiety. He was a man of the land, a strong, capable rancher, but when it came to intimacy, he felt like a boy, clumsy and ignorant. He feared rejection more than anything, the confirmation of his deepest insecurities. Elara, however, seemed to sense his trepidation. Her touch was always gentle, her words reassured. She spoke of the rhythms of the earth, the natural flow of energy, the importance of letting go of what no longer served him. She never pushed, but her quiet understanding was a constant invitation. One sweltering afternoon, they were working together, clearing brush from a fence line. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the air was thick with dust and the scent of dry creosote. Silas, swinging his axe, felt a sharp pain shoot up his arm. He twisted his wrist. He gritted his teeth, trying to hide the winds. Silas. Elara was beside him instantly, her eyes keen. What is it? He tried to wave her off. Just a little twist. Nothing. But she ignored him. Gently she took his hand, her fingers cool against his hot skin. She examined his wrist, her touch surprisingly firm and knowing. You've strained it badly. Come, let's get you out of this sun. She led him back to the shade of the porch, sat him down, and went to fetch her remedies. She returned with a basin of cool water, a linen cloth, and a small jar of ointment made from desert herbs. She carefully washed the dust and sweat from his arm, then began to massage the balm into his wrist. Her fingers were strong, yet incredibly soft, working magic on his aching muscles. As her hands moved, Silas felt not just a physical relief, but a deep, unfamiliar sense of being cared for. He watched her face, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the quiet kindness in her eyes. The heat of the day, the pain in his wrist, all faded into the background, replaced by an overwhelming awareness of her. Her scent, a mix of herbs and a natural warmth, filled his senses. He felt a tremor run through him, a feeling that had nothing to do with pain. It was a raw, aching need that had been buried so deeply he'd almost forgotten it existed. The years of loneliness, the unspoken desires, the fear of connection, they all converged in that moment in the gentle circling of her thumb against his skin. Her gaze met his, and he saw a mirror of the longing he felt. Her touch stilled on his wrist, but her fingers remained wrapped around his. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Silas, she whispered, her voice husky, a soft breeze in the hot afternoon. You've lived a life of such quiet strength, but the strength also needs solace, a place to rest. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know how, Elara. I've never... The words caught in his throat, the confession of his virginity hanging in the air, heavy and shameful. Elara's moss green eyes held his, unwavering, filled with a tenderness that banished all shame. She didn't mock, didn't recoil. Instead, she leaned closer, her breath warm on his cheek. Her thumb began to trace a slow, mesmerizing pattern on the back of his hand. Silas, she murmured, her voice a soothing balm that seemed to calm the wild beat of his heart. It's all right. There's no need for words, no need for fear. Her eyes softened, filled with a deep understanding that seemed to reach into the very core of his being. Then she raised his hand to her lips, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to his calloused palm. The simple touch sent a shock-wave through him, unraveling years of emotional restraint. His breath hitched. She leaned in, her gaze intense, her voice a low, compelling whisper that resonated through every fiber of his being. Let me show you what it feels like, she said. In that moment, all his resistance crumbled. The walls he had painstakingly built around his heart, the shields of solitude and fear, dissolved under the warmth of her gaze, the promise in her voice. He saw not pity, but genuine desire, a gentle invitation to a world he'd only dared to dream of. He was 40, but in her eyes, he was simply a man, worthy of touch, worthy of love. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her cheek. Her skin was soft, warm beneath his rough palm. He leaned in, his lips finding hers, tasting the sweetness of mint and the quiet strength of the desert. It was a kiss of hesitant discovery, of years of longing finally unleashed. It was clumsy, perhaps, but filled with an overwhelming hunger, a desperate yearning for connection. Elara responded with a tender patience that both encouraged and guided him. Her hand moved from his wrist, up his arm, finding the back of his neck, pulling him gently closer. The kiss deepened, a slow, unfolding revelation. The world outside, the harsh sun, the silent ranch, all faded away. There was only the gentle murmur of their breaths, the soft brush of their lips, and the breaking of a lifetime solitude in the warmth of her embrace. He was no longer just Silas Blackwood, the lonely rancher. He was a man, finally, fully alive. The days that followed were not a sudden explosion of passion, but a slow, tender unfurling. Elara continued to be the quiet, steady presence she always had been. But now there was an intimacy, a shared understanding that deepened with each passing hour. Silas found himself opening up, not in torrents of words, but in hesitant sentences, in shared silences that were now brimming with contentment rather than emptiness. He discovered the simple joys of companionship, sharing his morning coffee on the porch, her hand occasionally brushing his working side by side, their movements synchronized a comfortable rhythm between. He learned to anticipate her quiet laughter, the gentle way she would touch his arm when she wanted his attention. Their nights were a revelation. Elara was a patient teacher, guiding him with a tenderness that banished all his long-held fears and insecurity. She showed him that intimacy was not just physical, but a dance of souls, a merging of spirits. Her touch was a language he was only just beginning to understand, a lexicon of comfort, pleasure, and profound connection. She made him feel cherished, desired, a man who, despite his age and inexperience, was finally finding his place in the landscape of human touch. Silas, in turn, learned to give. He learned to express affection, not just through actions, but through glances, through the soft curve of his hand against her cheek, through quiet words of admiration that surprised even himself. He found a vulnerability he never knew he possessed, a willingness to be seen, truly seen, by another person. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a quiet joy, a sense of belonging he'd never thought possible. The road out of Blackwood Ranch remained washed out for several more weeks, but neither of them mentioned it. The urgency for Elara to leave had vanished, replaced by an unspoken desire for her to stay. One evening, as the stars began to pepper the darkening sky, they sat on the porch, her head resting on his shoulder. The familiar cry of a coyote echoed in the distance, but it no longer sounded lonely. "The road will be clear soon, Silas," Elara said softly, her voice a gentle murmur against his ear. He stiffened slightly. He knew this moment would come. The question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the land that had defined his life, then settling on her. "What then, Elara?" His voice was gruff, but held a deep undertone of vulnerability. She lifted her head, her moss-green eyes reflecting the first few stars. "My life is on the road, Silas. I heal, I travel. I bring remedies to those who need them." "And what about the one who needed a remedy for his own heart?" he asked, his voice low. A soft smile touched her lips. "He found it, didn't he? Or rather, he found the courage to let it in." She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "But a remedy, once applied, doesn't mean the journey ends. It means the healing begins." Silas's heart pounded. He knew he couldn't demand she stay. Her spirit was as wild and free as the desert wind. But he also knew he couldn't imagine his life without her anymore. The silence of the ranch, which he had once considered magnificent, now seemed impossibly bleak without her warmth, her laughter, her presence. "Stay," he said, the word simple, direct, raw with feeling. "Stay with me, Elara. This ranch, it could be your home too. You don't have to keep moving. There's always healing to be done here for the land." For the animals. For me. Elara looked at him, her eyes searching his, seeing the naked truth in his gaze. She saw the years of solitude, the deep, honest love that now shone in his eyes. She saw the man who had been a fortress of loneliness, now willing to lay his heart bare for her. Silas, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, my heart has found a home here with you, a place to rest, to be nourished. She squeezed his hand. I don't know what the future holds, but for now, for as long as you'll have me, I'll stay. A profound sense of peace, deeper and more expansive than any he had ever known, settled over Silas. The vastness of the desert no longer felt empty, but full, boundless with possibility. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of herbs and desert bloom. The sun rose the next morning, painting the sky with hues of hope and new beginning. Blackwood Ranch, once a monument to a solitary life, now echoed with the quiet sounds of two hearts beating in harmony. Silas Blackwood, the rancher who had believed himself destined for a life of magnificent solitude, had found something far more profound, a shared horizon, a love as vast and enduring as the desert itself, and a future that, for the very first time, he was eager to explore. The land still demanded hard work, but now he would face it not alone, but with the woman who had shown him what it truly felt like to live and to